take you through how I made the sketch from start to finish. So the first thing I do is identify an object that I want to include in the sketch that's going to be a good reference point. And for me in this case it was the middle stone bollard that I can see, and you can see me here putting in the edge of the one to the left of that first bollard, putting in the little bits of grass and the puddle. The puddle is the main reason I'm drawing this scene. I really love puddles because they reflect so beautifully. They usually have a still surface, especially on a calm day like this, and you get this perfect reflection. Now the important thing about the reflection is to make it 100% vertical below the subject that is doing the reflecting. So even if you think, I'm not quite sure if that's fully vertical, go back and tweak it until it's just perfect. So I've done the outside rim of the puddle, and I'm just sketching in those diagonal shadows that the stone bollards are casting across the path. And I'm using the positions of the stone bollards to get the correct positions of the road as it turns away, as it winds its way around the corner. Adding another little puddle. I'm trying to make sure that I don't lean on any of my puddles to smudge them, because I want to keep them completely white. It's only if they're kept completely white with respect to the area around it that they will sort of read as water, if you like. The other side of the bollard here, this is the main one ahead of me. Being careful to note the position of the top of the bollard in relation to the others. So it's just a question of eyeballing each of the little shapes you make so that they end up in the right place. I filled in on the right hand side of each of the bollards because the sun is coming from the left. Just doing a little bit of gravel, fixing the position of the edge of the slabs, and just making sure my bollards are the right width. Now I'm using a Fude pen, which is great. It's a Fude 55 degree pen, and it's brilliant because it means that you can fill in areas very, very easily and quickly. Just making it a little bit wider there because I saw that it wasn't quite the right width. Getting the other little puddles in. And I'm doing this sketch, by the way, on site, but I'm working from the completed sketch that I did earlier because it takes a lot of concentration to do it from life, let's say the first time around, and it's much easier for me to do a demo if I use my first one as a model. Filling in the far wall, seawall. The road has a nice little bend. It bends around nearly 90 degrees as it turns the corner, and then we've got the seawall here. Now when the tide comes up right to the top of the wall at high tide, you can have the water going all the way up, sometimes halfway up this wall that I'm drawing here. Adding little bits of gravel, little bits of grass. So the sun being quite strong and low in the sky means that even the little blades of grass are seen quite clearly because they're silhouetted against the strong light. Another little edge of a puddle coming in here. And I want to get as much of the line work in as I possibly can before I start adding paint, because once you add paint to a sketch, the texture of the page changes a little bit. I think it's because the paint makes the paper more absorbent and your line will be a bit thicker. So you want to get your lines down as much as possible before you add any paint. Just adding a little boat here to the left. Now the boat is a lot lower. By the time I got to sketching it, it was a lot lower in the water than when I first arrived because the tide changes quickly. And by the time I'd finished the sketch, the boat wasn't even on water. It was resting on the ground, the sandy beach. So you can see I'm filling in the slabby stones that form the edge of the quay, and you must make sure that they're in a straight line. So you can see I missed my straight line there and I'm just fixing it up. They should be continuous. Little bits of seaweed on the shore and the top of the seawall, bottom of the base of the boat. And the reflection is very, very dark under the boat. So I'm filling that in with pen because I'm going to darken it up anyway, a lot. So I might as well get going. I often use the ink of my pen as a means to get those darks in, because before I add paint, because the values are so important. You must show the relative darkness of all your little subjects and all your little areas of colour in order to get a really atmospheric sketch. And that's what I'm all about. I love trying to capture the atmosphere as it was on the day. The minute I put a little bit of sky in, I find just the edge of a bit of a cloud, suddenly things begin to look real and come together. So I like to do that as early as possible. This is just the little fence, little barbed wire fence at the back of the scene. And so the horizon, if you like, is made up of this little very brambly hedge. Just doing those uprights of the wooden posts, adding a bit more grass in. Some more bits of slab and the horizontal gaps between the slabs. More grass. Bits of gravel. Adding little bits of shadow. So anywhere I can see that can, reasonably filled in with a pen to be dark, well, I'll do that, because then when I paint on top of it, it means the job is sort of half done. Can't see much more that has to be done here. Got most of my lines in. A few little bits of texture. Side of the bollard, bits on the seawall. So there we go. Pretty much ready to go for a bit of paint. I've added a bird at the top. First thing I do is I want to get that contrast going. So I'm using Deep Sea Black, the super granulating colour by Schminke, for my posts. And then I'm using Deep Sea Violet by Schminke, super granulating colour, to get that dark road colour. So the metal surface of the road is really well represented in this Deep Sea Violet by Schminke. Back to Deep Sea Black for the first, let's say the biggest bollard, the biggest one, the one closest to me. But my job is to darken up as much as I can around the puddles so that the water really shines out and gives the effect of reflecting the sky. Sometimes it's hard to do that with a first pass of paint. I'm just wondering now, as I say, I am outdoors doing this and the sun is shining across my page, and I couldn't help but wonder, would I have been better in full sunlight? But actually sometimes full sunlight isn't so good either, because you can get a lot of glare on the page. Filling in around the puddles with the Deep Sea Violet. So these super granulating colours, they can look a bit, I'm not going to say ordinary, but they can look a bit unprepossessing before they dry, but it's only once they dry that you really get the effect. Now this one is a little bit of Aquarius Green by Roman Schmal. A really lovely, dark, sludgy and very granulating colour. A beautiful shade of green that I use a lot. When it's dry, it has these little flecks of dark blue in it, which is just gorgeous. And what's lovely about Aquarius Green is that it can be used for any sort of urban foliage or just any quick trees or bushes that you might like to do quickly, and you won't get that garish sort of acidic colour green when you use a colour like that. The other go-to green I have in my palette is this one I'm using here, which is Green Appetite Genuine by Daniel Smith. Now, to be honest, it's almost identical to Aquarius Green by Roman Schmal, but the Aquarius Green is a little bit darker. And to be honest, I couldn't choose between the two. So I have both of them in my very limited palette. I mean, I only have about 14 or 15 colours in total. So it really is probably not wise to have two colours that are almost identical. But there you go. We're creatures of whim sometimes, I think. Filling in the little hedge at the back. A little bit of Payne's grey. Perhaps a little bit of burnt umber just to get that browny colour of the hedge. And a really very, very dark hedge at the back. It's very silhouetted against the morning light. A little bit of the seawall here. And now adding a bit of blue for the boat. Now the boat's top plastic bit is very bright indeed. It's a very bright blue. So I went with phthalo blue for the plasticky bright bits, but I made sure to leave the bits around it, above it and beside it, completely unpainted and white, just to show that they're really reflecting the bright white of the sky. Now, it might be surprising if you see someone using a colour on a white object, like the side of the boat is white, but you have to show that it's in shade. So a good way to do that is by just using a little bit of a dilute version, maybe of Payne's Grey or Deep Sea Black, which is the colour I chose. Giving a second pass to that hedge at the back. Keeping it nice and muted. Now this particular sketch, it only has a couple of colours, and they're very muted colours. You've got muted greens, muted browns, muted purples, muted blues and muted greys. And I think for that reason it would make a fabulous sketch for a tonal study, where it's so important to know what's darker than what and what's lighter than what. Because remember, you can't paint light. All you can do is paint shade to show the light. Now, I did notice during the sketch that the reflected part of the bollard, the stone bollard there, it actually didn't have that white left-hand side lit up by the sun. So I filled it in with a little bit of deep sea black or something like that, just to really get the realistic feeling. And building up the road colour around it, just again, you'll begin to notice the more I deepen up the road colour around the puddles, the more the puddles will look like they're shining out white, reflecting the bright morning sky. Now, even though that wall is lit up in the sunshine, it's nice to have a little bit of a light brown colour on it to show that the wall is still brown, just very, very light. For the sky, what I like to do is I like to put a band of clean water, and then onto the clean water just put a wash of whatever blue you're using for the sky, because that way you won't end up with any brush strokes. I've added some more water at the top of the page just to throw in some very, very dilute deep sea black and a little bit of the deep sea violet as well. And that's a very good way to represent the threat of distant rain clouds. So let's take a look at the original sketch again. Again, you can see the contrast around the puddles is what makes the water look like water. So it's really deepened up. And same applies for that row of hedges at the back. And your job is to just wait for each layer to dry before giving it a second layer. And it's that contrast that really makes it atmospheric. I also use that pen work. You can see the pen work just to jump to the chase when it comes to seaweed and shadow. The little bits of wall are reflected in the puddles as well, and those shadows are diagonal, shooting their way across the little road. If you can get out and sketch in the morning, it's well worth it. It's such a lovely time to be out there. It really is a very beautiful part of the world, this little piece of South Galway. Pristine, and really the only people around there are people who are working the land and working the sea. So you can just about make out Island Eddy in the distance. And at low tide, believe it or not, you can walk across to the island. All that sea is gone. And you can see little shoots of water spitting up out of the sand as you walk. And that's either razor clams or queen scallops, I'm not sure which, but it's very cute anyway. Now, Island Eddy is actually a very rich island. The land is very rich and fertile over there. And it was one of the few places where the famine didn't affect people as badly as on the mainland, just because the land is so fertile. And just there is where the oysters are harvested. You can just about make out the tracks. So that brings us to an end to this little piece about sketching in ink and watercolour down in Killenarin Pier. As you can see, Ruben has made a friend there. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it perhaps inspires you to get out nice and early in the morning, do a bit of sketching of your own.